While America's attention was locked on Iran, Tehran, and a crumbling ceasefire in the Strait of Hormuz, China activated a weapon so large, so legally untouchable, and so strategically devastating that the U.S. Navy has no established rules of engagement to deal with it. Not a missile, not a carrier, not a hypersonic glide vehicle. 200,000 fishing boats.
Large numbers of Chinese fishing boats crowded together into an area stretching over 200 nautical miles on 2 occasions in recent months.
What message is China sending with its recent deployment of thousands of fishing boats to the East China Sea? How could that play into a Taiwan contingency and a U.S. response?
目前准备进行广播驱离，因海象不佳，本艇实施广播驱离。
An unusual arrangement of thousands of Chinese fishing boats in the East China Sea may be part of Beijing's maritime tactics, the New York Times reports.
Asia Times confirmed that the U.S. Naval Institute estimates China has 200,000 fishing vessels that the state could weaponize, and that the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese Coast Guard, and the ruling Communist Party under Xi Jinping maintain full oversight of these vessels, deploying them as pieces on Beijing's geopolitical chessboard. 200,000. Each one legally classified as a civilian vessel under international maritime law. Each one impossible to shoot without triggering an international incident. Each one capable of carrying communications equipment, radar jamming technology, naval mines, and targeting data for the planned warships operating behind them. And China just proved it can mobilize them at scale, deploying 2,000 in a single blockade formation on Christmas Day 2025, then 1,400 more in mid-January 2026, and now simultaneously surging the aircraft carrier Liaoning through the Taiwan Strait into the South China Sea, while a Type 055 destroyer reportedly launched a YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missile near Philippine waters, all timed precisely to coincide with the largest U.S.-Philippines military exercise in history. The world just went on high alert, and the weapon America cannot legally shoot is already in the water. Before we reveal exactly what China's maritime militia did in December 2025 and January 2026, that satellite imagery confirmed was a full-scale blockade rehearsal. And what Gregory Poling of CSIS said it was really practicing. Why the Liaoning carrier transiting the Taiwan Strait on April 20th, 2026? While a PLAN task group simultaneously entered the Western Pacific represents what analysts called a tactical envelopment rehearsal targeting U.S. forces near Luzon, from 2 directions simultaneously, what a Type 055 destroyer reportedly firing a YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missile near Philippine waters during Balikatan 2026 means for every U.S. carrier operating in the Western Pacific. Why China's 200,000 vessel maritime militia exploits a legal loophole that renders standard naval rules of engagement useless, and what legal experts say commanders can actually do about it, how China sanctioned Hengli Petrochemical while simultaneously buying 80% of Iran's oil, and what the U.S. Treasury's response reveals about the economic war running beneath the military one, and why analysts are now describing China's concurrent operations as a tactical envelopment rehearsal aimed at forces operating near Luzon. Subscribe right now and hit that bell. Because what China just activated near the Philippines is not a naval exercise. It is a live demonstration of the weapon that breaks every rule America wrote for how wars at sea are supposed to be fought. We connect it right now. Here is what China's secret weapon actually is, and why 200,000 fishing boats is the most legally devastating military asset ever assembled. China's People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia, the PAFMM, is a backup force working in close coordination with the Chinese Coast Guard and Navy, comprising a mixture of purpose-built maritime militia vessels and normal fishing boats recruited by the central government via subsidy programs, with most vessels between 45 and 65 meters long, and some equipped with reinforced bows for ramming, high-powered water cannons, communication systems for espionage, naval mines, and anti-aircraft weapons, reinforced bows, naval mines, anti-aircraft weapons, on boats that international law classifies as civilian fishing vessels protected from attack during military operations. That protection is the weapon, not the boats themselves, the legal classification that makes them untouchable. A January 2026 U.S. congressional report documented evidence that Beijing's maritime fishing vessels are used to expand Chinese influence, monopolize sea lanes, and push Indo-Pacific nations toward economic dependency, with the PLA and Communist Party maintaining full oversight and deploying them as pieces on Beijing's geopolitical chessboard. Geopolitical chessboard. The same vessels that carry fish to market on Monday are carrying intelligence data and blocking U.S. Navy transit routes on Tuesday, and then returning to port as civilian fishing boats by Wednesday. Much as Russia deployed Little Green Men to maintain plausible deniability during its seizure of Crimea, China employs its maritime fishing militia as Little Blue Men in flashpoints across the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and the waters around Japan's Ryukyu Islands. Little Blue Men. Invisible to the rules of engagement, visible on every radar screen, legally untouchable until they cross a threshold America struggles to define in real time. The Indo-Pacific Defense Forum confirmed that under international law, fishing vessels lose their protected status when they provide effective contribution to military action, including when deployed to obstruct naval vessel movement, conduct intelligence and surveillance operations, or saturate an adversary's radar with thousands of false targets. Thousands of false radar targets. 200,000 boats all appearing simultaneously on a U.S. Navy destroyer's radar screen, each one requiring classification, civilian or combatant, in seconds, under fire, in a contested strait. That classification problem is the weapon. China does not need its fishing boats to sink American ships. It needs them to slow American decision-making until Chinese warships and missiles can position for the kill. Here is what happened on Christmas Day 2025, and why satellite imagery confirmed this was not fishing. On Christmas Day, December 25, 2025, more than 2,000 Chinese fishing vessels deployed to the East China Sea and assembled a mock blockade in a reverse L-shaped formation, with satellite imagery and ship tracking data confirmed by the New York Times, showing the vessels had stopped trawling to form massive floating barriers approximately 470 kilometers long. 470 kilometers, a floating barrier nearly 300 miles long, assembled in hours. 2 weeks later, on January 14, 2026, 1,400 vessels performed a similar maneuver in the same waters, forming a barrier approximately 320 kilometers long. 2 formations, 3 weeks apart, one 470 kilometers, one 320 kilometers, both in the East China Sea, directly in the transit corridors that U.S. and Japanese naval vessels use to move between the Pacific and the Taiwan Strait. Gregory Poling, director of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative at CSIS, stated, "My best guess is this was an exercise to see how the civilians would do if told to muster at scale in a future contingency, perhaps in support of quarantine, blockade, or other pressure tactics against Taiwan. Quarantine, blockade, against Taiwan." The director of the most respected South China Sea monitoring organization on Earth telling the world what China was rehearsing, in plain language, without diplomatic softening. A Taiwan blockade, using civilian fishing boats, on a scale of 2,000 vessels assembled in hours, and nobody shot at a single one, because nobody legally could. Here is what the Liaoning just did, and why simultaneous two-direction pressure on U.S. forces near Luzon is what analysts called a tactical envelopment rehearsal. On April 17, 2026, a Japanese destroyer transited the Taiwan Strait. It was the 4th such transit by a Japanese warship since September 2024. China responded within 72 hours with something that had never happened before in exactly this configuration. On April 20, 2026, China deployed the aircraft carrier Liaoning through the Taiwan Strait into the South China Sea, while simultaneously dispatching a naval task group through the Yokohama Channel into the Western Pacific, with analysts describing the concurrent deployment as going well beyond a reaction to a single provocation. 2 directions, simultaneously. Liaoning entering the South China Sea from the north, while a separate planned task group entered the Philippine Sea from the east, encircling the theater of operations where Balikatan 2026 was underway with U.S., Philippine, Japanese, Australian, and Canadian forces. Since the main theater of Balikatan 2026 was centered on northern Luzon, concurrent plan operations in the Philippine Sea and the Liaoning in the South China Sea constituted what analysts explicitly described as a tactical envelopment rehearsal, with China practicing pressure on U.S. and allied forces from 2 directions at once. Tactical envelopment. That is a military maneuver designed to surround and isolate a force. China practiced surrounding American and allied forces near Luzon, the exact geographic position that would matter most in a Taiwan contingency, while those forces were in the middle of an exercise. Naval News confirmed China's increased presence during Balikatan 2026 included the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group operating in the South China Sea since the onset of the drills, alongside numerous warships, surveillance vessels, and H-6J anti-ship bombers staging operations against the exercise area. H-6J anti-ship bombers, staging against the exercise, not watching it, staging against it, positioning to attack targets that the exercise was practicing defending. Here is the YJ-21, and why a hypersonic anti-ship missile reportedly fired near Philippine waters during Balikatan changes the entire threat calculus for U.S. carriers. Defense Security Asia reported that a pro-PLA social media account claimed a Type 055 destroyer launched a YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missile during drills near Philippine waters while operating alongside the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group. And while independent verification of the specific missile launch remains absent, what is independently confirmed is the presence of major planned formations operating east of Luzon and across the South China Sea, conducting live-fire drills and integrated air-sea coordination in direct parallel with Balikatan 2026. Live-fire drills during a U.S.-Philippine exercise in the same waters. Defense security. Asia concluded that if verified, such a launch would signal that Beijing is prepared to demonstrate real-time maritime denial capability against high-value naval targets inside the Western Pacific battle space, specifically at a moment when the United States and the Philippines are conducting the largest alliance exercise in the region's history. Real-time maritime denial against high-value naval targets. That is diplomatic language for China fired a hypersonic anti-ship missile near the same waters where American carriers were operating. Whether it happened or not, China wanted America to believe it might have. That message is the weapon. The AEI and ISW, China-Taiwan. Update for May 8, 2026 confirmed the PLAN Southern Theater Command conducted 2 major deployments in the South China Sea and West Pacific, likely in response to Balikatan 2026, with the PRC aiming to demonstrate that Indo-Pacific regional military cooperation invites increased PLA military activity. Invites increased PLA activity. That is China's explicit doctrine stated in plain language. Every U.S. allied exercise produces a Chinese military response designed to make the exercise feel dangerous, costly, and ultimately not worth repeating. The goal is not to win a battle. The goal is to make allies wonder whether showing up to the next exercise is worth the risk. Here is the economic weapon running simultaneously, and why U.S. sanctions on a Chinese refinery reveal the war beneath the war. The U.S. Treasury announced on April 24, 2026, that it was placing sanctions on Chinese oil refinery Hengli Petrochemical, along with roughly 40 shipping companies and tankers involved in transporting Iranian oil, with at least 8 of the 19 sanctioned tankers owned by companies based in China, primarily Hong Kong, generating hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue for the Iranian military. Hundreds of billions in revenue for the Iranian military, flowing through a Chinese refinery, while America and Iran are fighting a war. The PRC purchased between 80 and 90% of Iran's oil prior to the war, making Beijing Iran's largest economic backer, and has continued to purchase Iranian oil throughout the war by accepting imports from tankers already in transit or storing oil at sea when hostilities began. 80 to 90%. China is keeping Iran's economy alive while Iran keeps Hormuz closed, and while China's carriers practice tactical envelopment of U.S. forces in the Pacific. 2 simultaneous fronts, one in the Middle East through economic support, one in the Pacific through military positioning, both happening right now. One thing is absolutely certain. China's maritime militia deployed 2,000 vessels in a 470-kilometer blockade formation on Christmas Day, 2025, and 1,400 vessels in a 320-kilometer formation on January 14, 2026, confirmed by satellite imagery as blockade rehearsals specifically for a Taiwan quarantine scenario. The Liaoning aircraft carrier transited the Taiwan Strait on April 20, 2026, while a planned task group simultaneously entered the Philippine Sea, surrounding Balikatan 2026 forces near Luzon from 2 directions in what analysts explicitly called a tactical envelopment rehearsal. H-6J anti-ship bombers staged operations against the Balikatan exercise area simultaneously. A Type 055 destroyer reportedly launched a YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missile near Philippine waters during the drills. The U.S. Naval Institute estimates China can weaponize 200,000 fishing vessels. U.S. congressional reporting confirms PLA and Communist Party oversight of every vessel. China purchased 80 to 90% of Iran's oil throughout the Iran war, keeping Tehran financially viable. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned Hengli Petrochemical and 40 shipping companies for Iranian oil smuggling on April 24th. and the AEIISW May 8, 2026 assessment confirmed China is pursuing an aggressive multi-domain strategy to counter U.S. influence in the Indo-Pacific, including escalating military posturing, expanded cyber espionage, and targeted economic coercion to isolate Taiwan. So here is what happens next. China activated a weapon that fires no bullets, launches no missiles, and triggers no formal act of war. 200,000 fishing boats that international law cannot touch, assembled in blockade formations visible from space, rehearsing exactly what they would do the morning a Taiwan quarantine order comes. Simultaneously, it surged 2 carrier groups in a tactical envelopment around U.S. and allied forces in the largest regional exercise in history. Simultaneously, it kept Iran financially alive through oil purchases that U.S. sanctions are now scrambling to stop. And simultaneously, it reportedly fired a hypersonic missile near American carriers to make sure nobody in Washington forgot what the stakes are. China did not fire a single shot at an American vessel. It did not need to. It demonstrated capability, intent, and legal immunity all at once. With fishing boats, carrier movements, and a missile nobody can fully confirm happened. America is watching Iran, and China is watching America watch Iran. Stay tuned.